In this line of work, you get used to the ghosts. Not the spooky kind, not at first anyway. I'm talking about the living ones, the people who haunt the 911 system. We call them frequent flyers. They're the lonely, the forgotten, the ones who've slipped through the cracks. Their emergencies are phantom pains, calls for help that have nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with a crushing, unbearable silence. For my partner Ben and me, our ghost had a name: Alvin Abernathy. His house was on a quiet, tree-lined street where all the other lawns were manicured and the paint was always fresh. Abernathy's place stuck out like a rotten tooth. It was a crumbling two-story Victorian that might have been beautiful a century ago. Now, the paint was peeling in long, leprous strips. The porch sagged like a tired old man, and the yard was a jungle of weeds and neglect. We'd been there maybe 6-7 times in the last year. The calls were always the same: vague chest pain, difficulty breathing, dizziness. And every time, we'd get there, run our tests, and find nothing. Vitals stable as a table, EKG clean as a whistle. Ben, my partner, was still new enough to have some sympathy left in him. He was a good kid, but he saw every patient as a person. I'd been on the job for 15 years. I saw them as puzzles, and Abernathy was a puzzle I was sick of trying to solve. He was a real thin man, in his late 80s, with watery, pale blue eyes that always seemed to be looking at something just over your shoulder. He'd sit there in his dusty, threadbare armchair, the whole house smelling of mothballs and decay, and he'd ramble. The last time we were there, about a month before. The night, he grabbed my arm with a surprising strength. His fingers felt like a bundle of cold twigs. "You smell that?" He'd whispered, his voice dry and crackling. "It's worse today." The smell? I took a deliberate sniff. Old house smell. That was it. "Smells fine, Mr. Abernathy," I said, packing up our monitor. No, he insisted, shaking his head. "It's sweet, like old meat. And the scratching, it kept me up all night, in the walls, right from down there." He pointed a trembling finger towards the floor, in the direction of the basement. Ben shot me a look, one of those humor him looks. "Probably just mice, sir," Ben said, his voice gentle. "This old house, you're bound to have some." Abernathy's eyes went wide. "Not mice," he hissed. "Bigger. We promised we'd mention it in our report. A lie we tell to wrap up calls like this, and we left. Driving away, Ben turned to me. "You think he's okay? I mean, mentally?" I just shrugged. "He's 88, lives alone, and probably hasn't had a real conversation in a decade. He's not crazy, Ben. He's just lonely. The scratching is in his head, and the smell is this house dying around him." Then came the call. It was a Tuesday, just after midnight. One of those sticky, oppressive summer nights where the air feels too thick to breathe. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, professional, but the address made my stomach clench. 1428 Elm Street. "Possible cardiac arrest," she said. "Not chest pain, not dizziness. Cardiac arrest, the real deal." Ben and I exchanged a look. For the first time, a call to Abernathy's house filled us with a cold, professional dread. We flew, lights and sirens cutting through the quiet suburban streets. I kept picturing him, alone in that dusty armchair, finally having the big one. We were the first on scene. The front door was ajar. We pushed it open, yelling, "Paramedics!" The only answer was the grandfather clock in the hall, ticking its slow, heavy rhythm. The smell hit me the second I stepped inside. It was different this time, stronger, and Abernathy had been right. It was sweet, cloying, and rotten. It was the smell of death. We found him on the floor at the end of the hall, lying near a closed door I never paid much attention to before. It led to the basement. He wasn't in cardiac arrest, not yet. He was pale and clammy, his breathing shallow, his eyes fluttering. He was in the middle of a massive heart attack. We went to work. Ben was on his chest, hitting EKG pads on, while I established in 4-line in his fragile, paper-thin arm. The whole time, he was trying to say something. His lips moved, but only a faint, gurgling sound came out. He kept trying to lift his hand, trying to point at the basement door. "Easy, Mr. Abernathy," I said, pushing nitroglycerin. "Don't try to talk. We've got you." But his eyes were locked on that door, and they were filled with a kind of terror I had never seen before. Not fear of dying. It was something else. Fear of what he was leaving behind. As we were working, Ben, while trying to get a blood pressure reading, jostled a set of keys hanging from a hook on the wall. They clattered to the floor. Mr. Abernathy's eyes darted to them, and he let out a choked, desperate sound. He was trying to tell us something about the keys, about that door. That's when Ben noticed it. "Hey, Jake," he said, his voice low. "Look at this." I glanced over. He was pointing at the basement door. It had a lock on it. Not a simple knob lock, but a heavy-duty industrial deadbolt. And it was on the outside. You don't lock a basement from the outside to keep people from getting in. You do it to keep something from getting out. The smell was coming from under that door. The sweet, rotten smell. It was overpowering now. And beneath the sound of Abernathy's strained breathing and the beeping of our monitor, I could hear another sound. A faint, rhythmic noise. Scrabble, scrabble, scrape. It was the scratching sound he told us about. Abernathy coded. His heart, which had been fighting so hard, finally gave out. The monitor blared a flatline tone. We started CPR, a brutal, violent ballet of chest compressions and forced breaths. As I was pushing on his chest, trying to force life back into his body, his eyes opened one last time. He looked straight at me, and with his final, rattling breath, he whispered one clear word. Hungry. He was gone. We worked on him for another 20 minutes, followed protocol to the letter, but it was no use. Time of death, 12:47 a.m. The protocol from here was simple. Call the coroner, call the police for an unattended death, pack up, and leave. But we couldn't. We both stood there in the silent hallway, the only sounds our own breathing and that soft, persistent scratching from behind the locked door. The smell was a living thing in the air around us. "We have to open it," Ben said. It wasn't a question. He was right. We couldn't leave, not knowing what was down there. He picked up the keychain from the floor. There were a half-dozen old, ornate keys on it. The third one he tried slid into the deadbolt. He turned it. The click of the lock turning echoed in the hallway like a gunshot. He pulled the door open. It wasn't a wave of smell that came out. It was a wall. It was the most foul, putrid stench I have ever encountered, and it was mixed with the overwhelming odor of bleach and ammonia. The scratching stopped. A profound silence fell over the house. Ben shone his flashlight down the steep wooden stairs. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small, bare room at the bottom. The walls and floor were stained concrete. In the center of the room was a simple metal cot with a stained mattress and a bucket in the corner. That was it. And chained to the wall, next to the cot, was a woman. She was skeletal, wrapped in rags, her hair a matted, filthy mess that hung past her waist. Her skin was pale, almost translucent from a lifetime without sunlight. She slowly lifted her head, and two wild, terrified eyes blinked in the sudden light. It was a creature from a nightmare. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, just a dry, rasping hiss. On the floor beside her was a dog bowl, empty, and her fingernails were worn down to bloody nubs from clawing at the concrete. Ben stumbled back, gagging. I felt the bile rise in my own throat. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I was seeing, and then I saw it. On a small, dusty shelf near the top of the stairs, there was a row of photo albums. I grabbed one. The cover said, Alvin and Rose, 1958. I opened it. There were black and white pictures of a young, smiling Mr. Abernathy next to a beautiful woman with bright, happy eyes. I looked from the photograph to the creature chained to the wall in the basement. It was her. It was Rose Abernathy. The town record said she'd run off and left him almost 50 years ago. She never left. He'd kept her down there. The scratching he heard, the smell he complained about. It wasn't delusion. It was his guilt, made real. He wasn't a lonely old man. He was a monster. A warden of a private hell he'd built right under everyone's noses. We hadn't been called there for his emergencies. He'd been calling us because deep down, he was terrified of her. And he wanted someone, anyone, to find her before he died. We were his final confession. There's a different kind of darkness out in the country. In the city, the night is never truly black. There's always an orange glow on the horizon, the hum of electricity, the faint pulse of life. But out here, on the graveyard shift in a rural county, the dark is absolute. It's a heavy, suffocating blanket that swallows the beams of your headlights and plays tricks on your eyes. And the worst calls are always the ones that take you down roads like Route 8. Route 8 isn't really a highway. It's a 2-lane strip of cracked asphalt that snakes through miles of dense forest and empty farmland. No streetlights, no houses, no cell service. It's just you, your ambulance, and whatever's hiding in the trees. My partner, Mike, and I got the call around 2 a.m., single vehicle MVA, the dispatcher said. Caller reported a car off the road near mile marker 12. Then the line went dead. Mike was an old-timer, a guy who operated on coffee and a cynical sense of humor. Mile marker 12, he sighed, steering the ambulance onto the dark road. Of course it is. The Bermuda Triangle of our county. He wasn't wrong. Weird things happened out on Route 8. People swore they saw things in the road, heard voices on their radios. Most of it was just exhaustion and imagination playing in the dark. Tonight, though, felt different. A storm was rolling in, and the air was charged with a strange electric tension. We found the car exactly where the caller said. It was a blue sedan, and it wasn't so much off the road as it was parked on the shoulder. It was just sitting there, perfectly parallel to the white line, its engine off. No skid marks, no broken glass, no sign of an accident at all. The only thing wrong was that all 4 doors were slightly ajar. We pulled up behind it, our headlights flooding the car with light. Mike grabbed our med bag. "This is weird, Sarah," he muttered. "Stay sharp." We approached cautiously. The driver's side door was open the widest. Inside, a woman was slumped over the steering wheel. She was maybe in her 30s, dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt. I reached in and felt for a pulse on her neck. Nothing. Her skin was cold and waxy. Mike shone his penlight in her eyes, fixed and dilated. "Yeah," he said quietly, "she's gone." So we started the grim routine process. We called it in. 1 DOA, scene is secure, awaiting coroner and state police. And that's when the weirdness cranked up to 11. While Mike was looking for a registration or ID, I did a sweep around the car with my flashlight. There was no damage, not a scratch, not a dent. The grass on the shoulder wasn't even disturbed. It was like the car had just been gently placed there. Then I looked at the woman again. There was no obvious sign of trauma, no blood, nothing to indicate why she had died. Except for one thing. On her stomach, just below her rib cage, was a dark, puckered line of what looked stitches. But they were crude, thick, like something done with a fishing line and a rusty needle. It wasn't a surgical scar. It looked like she'd been sewn up by a butcher. "Hey, Mike," I called. "You gotta see this." He came over and whistled low. What in God's name is that? We couldn't touch her, not until the coroner arrived. It was a potential crime scene now. We backed away and decided to wait in the ambulance. That's where we sat for the next hour, a silent vigil in the humming, sterile box of our rig. The storm got closer, lightning spider-webbing across the sky without any thunder. The only sound was the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers. We were both on edge. We tried to make small talk, to rationalize what we were seeing. Maybe she had some kind of back alley surgery, Mike offered, and was trying to drive herself to a hospital. It didn't feel right. None of it did. I couldn't stop looking at the car in our side mirror. The way the strobing red and blue lights of our ambulance washed over it made it look unreal. And that's when I saw it. In the fraction of a second, when the blue light hit the driver's side window, I saw her head move. It was just a small jerk, but it was unmistakable. "Mike," I whispered, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "Mike," she moved. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Sarah, she's been gone for over an hour." Rigor was already setting in. It was a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. I stared at the mirror, not blinking, my eyes burning. "No, I saw it. Look." We both watched in silence. For a full minute, nothing. Mike let out a breath. "See? Nothing." And then it happened again. This time, her whole upper body lurched forward, slamming back against the seat. We were out of the ambulance in a second, sprinting towards the car, all protocol forgotten. This wasn't possible. Maybe it's a Lazarus phenomenon. Mike yelled, referring to the rare occurrence of a patient's circulation spontaneously returning after they've been pronounced dead. But this wasn't that. As we got closer, we could hear a sound from inside the car. A wet, tearing sound, and a low, guttural clicking. I reached the driver's side door first and froze, my blood turning to ice. The woman was moving, but she wasn't alive. Her body was convulsing violently, like a puppet being handled by a spastic puppeteer. The crude stitches on her stomach were ripping open. They weren't holding a wound closed. They were holding something in. As we watched in horror, the stitches tore completely, and the flesh of her abdomen split apart. It wasn't blood and guts that spilled out. It was a thing. A creature, long and pale, with too many joints in its spidery legs. It was the size of a cat, white and larval, and it unfurled itself from the cavity of her body with a sickening, wet squelch. It had no eyes, just a round, leech-like mouth that was clicking and chattering. It had been gestating inside her. She hadn't crashed her car. She had pulled over dying, as this thing inside her prepared to be born. The creature crawled out of her, onto the driver's seat, and turned its eyeless head towards us. Mike and I just stood there, paralyzed by a terror so absolute, it felt like it had stopped time itself. Then it moved. It scurried across the seat, out the open passenger door, and dropped onto the asphalt. For a second, it paused under the flashing lights of our ambulance. Then it darted across the road and vanished into the impenetrable darkness of the woods. We didn't say a word. We slowly backed away from the car, from the hollowed-out shell of the woman inside. We got back in our ambulance and locked the doors. Mike got on the radio. His voice was shaking so badly he could barely speak. "Dispatch, we need state police and the coroner here now. And you need to tell them to be armed." The dispatcher asked why. Mike just looked at me, then looked out at the dark tree line. "Just tell them," he said, and shut the radio off. We sat there in silence, the storm finally breaking overhead, the rain hammering on our roof. We knew the coroner would come up with some explanation. An animal attack, a deranged killer. But we knew the truth. The woman on Route 8 wasn't the victim. She was just the delivery service. and whatever she was carrying is now out there, in the dark. And it's hungry. They tell you in EMT school that you have to be detached. You have to be a medic, not a mourner. In a mass casualty incident, you become a calculator. You do the cold, brutal math of who can be saved and who is already gone. You learn the language of the tags. Green means they can walk. Yellow means they can wait. Red means they need you right now. And black means you say a silent prayer and walk away. A black tag is a death sentence you don't write, you just deliver. I never thought one would come back, return to sender. My first real MCI was the Vantage Point apartment building collapse. A gas leak, they said. It took a 7-story building and turned it into a pile of shattered concrete and twisted rebar. I was 6 months out of school, still so green, I practically photosynthesized. The scene was pure chaos. Dust so thick it was like walking through a gray fog. The air filled with the screams of the injured and the sirens of a dozen different agencies. My job was triage. Me and a dozen other EMTs and medics wading into the rubble to do the math. I must have tagged 20 people in the first hour. It becomes a blur. You move fast. You don't get attached. You don't use names. You check for a pulse, check for breathing. Yes or no. Red or black. Move on. I was climbing over a mountain of debris when I found him. He was pinned from the waist down by a huge slab of concrete. His body twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the dusty sky. I knelt down. Sir, can you hear me? Nothing. I put 2 fingers on his neck. No pulse. I held my stethoscope to his chest. Silence. His skin was already cool. The math was simple. Obvious injuries incompatible with life. No pulse, no respirations. I took a black tag from my kit. It's a thick piece of cardstock with a wire tie. On it, you just mark the time. I wrote 1932 with my Sharpie, looped the wire around his wrist, and tightened it. I met his vacant stare for a second, muttered, "I'm sorry," and moved on. I had to. There were red tags, people screaming, people I could still save. I didn't think about him again for the rest of the night. The shift ended at 6 a.m. I was a ghost, caked in dust and the metallic smell of blood, my ears still ringing. I went back to the station, took the longest, hottest shower of my life, but I couldn't wash the feeling of grit from my skin or the images from my mind. I was sitting alone in the break room, staring into a styrofoam cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking when my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I figured it was my supervisor, so I answered. "Kevin?" The voice on the other end was quiet, weak, and surrounded by a strange, static hiss. "Hello?" I said. "Who is this?" There was a long pause, and the voice spoke again, a dry, papery whisper. "You left me." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked again, my voice sharper this time. "It's a bad connection." "The tag is tight on my wrist," the voice rasped. 1932. You wrote the time. You looked at my face, and you walked away. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the tile floor. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. This was a prank. It had to be. One of the guys, one of the veteran medics trying to haze the new guy after a tough call. It was a sick, twisted joke, but it had to be the explanation. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking, and hung up. I sat there, my mind racing, trying to convince myself it was a joke. But the voice, it sounded so strange, so empty. My phone buzzed again. Same blocked number. I almost didn't answer it. Morbid curiosity, or maybe just the need to scream at whoever was doing this, made me press the button. "Stop calling me. I snarled into the phone. The whispering voice ignored me. "You're drinking coffee now, from a white cup. It says County EMS on the side in blue letters. You're rubbing your thumb over the logo." I looked down at my hands. I was doing exactly that. My blood ran cold. I jumped up, looking around the empty break room. The windows were too high to see in from the outside. "How do you know that?" I stammered. "Who is this?" "The concrete is so heavy," the voice hissed, the static around it seeming to get louder. "It's dark and cold. All I could do was watch. I watched you put the tag on me. I watched you leave. I couldn't scream, but I was screaming inside. I screamed your name, Kevin. I guess you finally heard me." This wasn't a prank. The sheer impossibility of it washed over me in a wave of nausea. I ran out of the break room, into the main bay where the ambulances were parked, looking for anyone, for another living soul. The station was empty. The night shift crew had gone home, and the day shift wasn't in yet. I was alone. My phone started ringing again. I threw it across the bay. It shattered against the concrete wall, the battery skittering across the floor. I sank to my knees, gasping for air. It was over. He couldn't call me anymore. But then I heard it. It wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from all around me. A whisper, carried on the air itself, seeming to echo in the cavernous ambulance bay. And it was inside my head. "You can't hang up on me, Kevin. It's been a month since the collapse. I quit my job. I couldn't do it anymore. But it doesn't matter. He's still with me. I hear him when it's quiet. Sometimes it's a faint whisper. Sometimes it's as clear as if he's standing right behind me. He describes what I'm doing. He comments on my thoughts. He tells me over and over again how cold it is under the rubble. The math was wrong. I checked for a pulse, for breathing, for signs of life. But I never checked for a soul. I tagged his body, but I took his ghost with me. He was my first black tag. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very core, that he's going to be my last. He's made it his mission to make sure of it. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. The ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.